All right, we're jumping right into a declassified document that honestly reads like something out of a spy thriller. This was a secret plan cooked up at the highest levels of the US government, all about how to manufacture a reason to go to war. So let's just start with a really uncomfortable question. Do you think it's possible that the United States military could ever draft a plan to stage attacks on American soil, targeting its own people, just to justify invading another country?
Well, the answer, and this is pretty shocking, is yes. Back in 1962, a formal proposal was actually written and signed off on. It outlined a whole series of violent acts that would be carried out against Americans, all for the sake of public relations.
And this plan had a name, Operation Northwoods. Now let's be crystal clear about what this was. This wasn't some rogue idea from a low-level officer. This was a proposal from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We're talking the top uniformed leaders of the entire U.S. military. And their idea was to orchestrate fake attacks and then blame them on Cuba.
Okay, so we've got to unpack this because the immediate question is, how could this possibly even be considered? To get that, you have to understand the political climate of the early 1960s and what the government was calling the Cuban problem. The context here is just absolutely crucial. Just a year before this, in 1961, the CIA-backed Bay of Pigs invasion had failed spectacularly. It was a total catastrophe and a huge embarrassment for the Kennedy administration. So in response, the U.S. launched something called Operation Mongoose, which was basically a covert war of sabotage against Castro. It's out of this, this really desperate atmosphere that Operation Northwoods was born. See, the military leadership was totally convinced that a full-scale invasion was the only real way to get rid of Castro, but they had a major problem: the American public. People just had no appetite for another war. So Northwoods was literally engineered to solve that problem, to create a justification so horrifying that the public would demand retaliation. So what exactly was in this proposal? I mean, when you actually read the declassified memo, it feels less like a military document and more like a twisted menu of deceptive options. And believe me, each one is more shocking than the last.
Just listen to the language in this direct quote. They were literally proposing a modern remember the Maine moment. But the cold calculation is what really gets you. Casualty lists would cause a helpful wave of national indignation. Wow. They weren't just proposing an attack. They were scripting the public's emotional reaction to it.
And it got so much worse. The plan also detailed staging a whole communist Cuban terror campaign right here in the United States. We're talking about sinking a boat of refugees, setting off bombs in Miami and Washington, D.C., even staging fake attacks on Cuban exiles. And the whole point was to blame every single bit of it on Castro, to paint this picture of a reckless, dangerous government that had to be stopped.
But maybe the most cinematic, and frankly the most disturbing part of the whole plan, was something that sounds like it was ripped straight out of a Hollywood script. It involved a civilian airplane, a group of unsuspecting college students, and a high-tech military drone.
Okay, so here's how this crazy deception was supposed to work. First, they take an empty drone and paint it to look exactly like a real charter flight. Then, the real plane, with all its passengers, would take off, but it would be secretly diverted to a secure airbase. At the same time, the drone would take its place, fly toward Cuba, and start broadcasting a distress call claiming it was being attacked by Cuban fighter jets. And then, bam, the drone would be blown up by remote control over the ocean, leaving wreckage to be discovered as proof of the attack.
So this horrifying plan, signed by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs himself, makes its way up the chain of command. But this is where the story takes a really critical turn. It lands on the desks of the civilian leadership, and thankfully, a moral line is finally drawn.
And this, right here, just perfectly illustrates the huge conflict at play. From the Pentagon's Cold War point of view, American lives were, well, tragically, they were seen as expendable pawns to achieve the big strategic goal of stopping communism. But for the White House, the idea of murdering your own citizens for a PR campaign was, as it should be, seen as morally disgusting.
The plan was given directly to Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, and he took it to President Kennedy. And by all accounts, both of them were just appalled. The rejection was immediate. It was absolute. Civilian oversight worked exactly the way it's supposed to, stopping a really dangerous military overreach dead in its tracks.
So the plan was rejected, and you might think the story ends there. But the legacy of Operation Northwoods is just as important as the plan itself, mostly because, for decades, nobody even knew it existed. That 40-year secret is really key to understanding why this whole thing still matters so much today.
40 years. I mean,
Just let that sink in. For 4 decades, this official document, proposing acts of domestic terrorism by the U.S. military, was completely hidden from the public, locked away in some classified file.
So how did we even find out about it? Well, it was only brought to light in the 1990s, and it was almost by accident. The JFK Assassination Records Review Board started declassifying huge amounts of documents from that time, and all of a sudden, this shocking piece of history was out in the open for everyone to see.
So why does a rejected plan from 1962 still resonate today? Well, first, it's actual, concrete proof that false flag operations aren't just some fringe conspiracy theory. They have been seriously proposed at the highest levels. Second, it gives historical weight to the idea of a deep state. You know, powerful elements within the government that have their own agenda. And finally, it forces us to look at the justifications for other wars, like the Gulf of Tonkin incident that kicked off the Vietnam War, with a much more skeptical eye.
The whole document is just bone-chilling to read, from start to finish. But out of all the cold, bureaucratic language about sinking ships and staging terror attacks, there is one line, one specific suggestion that just stands out as the most haunting of all.
When they were describing the potential victims for their fake plane crash, the people whose deaths would be staged to start a war, the memo just casually suggests the passengers could be a group of college students off on a holiday. And it's that final human detail that makes Operation Northwoods a truly sobering lesson in just how far some people are willing to go.